Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here. I'm Roy Idelson, President of the Society for the Study of Peace, Conflict, and Violence, Division 48 of the American Psychological Association. Today's webinar is the second in our series reflecting our theme for 2025, Resisting Oppression, Pursuing Justice. The title of today's session is We Must Not Look Away, Confronting the Atrocities Against Palestinian Lives. Ironically, as we gather here at this moment, the Anti-Defamation League is holding its annual Never Is Now convention in New York City. It presents a striking contrast. Consider, for example, that the ADL's purportedly authoritative and much cited anti-Semitism database officially counts protests in support of Palestinian rights, even those organized by Jews, as anti-Semitic incidents. Consider, too, that a highlighted speaker at today's ADL event is Republican Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, President Trump's nominee as U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. During her recent confirmation hearing in Washington, she insisted that Israel has a biblical right to the West Bank. I offer this background to provide some context in regard to our speakers today. We are incredibly fortunate to have with us two exemplars of what integrity, courage, and undeterred truth-telling looks like. I may be a bit old and a bit cynical as well, but apparently I'm still young enough and idealistic enough to view those qualities with tremendous admiration. They've requested that I keep my introductions of them brief, so that's what I'll do. Francesca Albanese is the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian Territory occupied since 1967. She holds a law degree from the University of Pisa and a Master of Laws degree in Human Rights from the University of London. Gabor Maté is a Canadian physician and author. He is recognized for his compassionate approach to healing and his work exploring the mind-body connection, with a special focus on childhood development, trauma, and its potential lifelong impacts on physical and mental health. Together in conversation with each other, they will share with us their concerns, insights, and experiences. After a half hour or so, we'll open it up to questions. So please post your questions in the Q&A box at any point during the session, and we'll try to get it to as many of those as we can. And now I'll turn things over to Ms. Albanese and Dr. Maté.
Thank you, Roy. Francesca, it's great to speak with you.
Thank you, Roy, and thank you, Gabor. It's a great opportunity to talk to you. And I'm not the only one who looks at you as a source of inspiration, especially in these dark times. And that is, if you allow me, I would like to start by asking you a couple of questions that I've been confronted with. One is why the words wisdom and compassion, which are so necessary to each healing experience of individuals and societies, find no space in between, in Israel, in the Israel-Palestine debate. And the other question is more contextual to my own experience as a lawyer, as someone who gives lectures, as a legal expert, as a special rapporteur. And I realized that at my events, over and over for 16 months, hundreds of people have come and transforming that listening space into a collective space for grief. Because especially in Western societies, we lack that space for collective grief. And we don't know how to elaborate that pain, that sorrow that we carry. So over to you.
Well, only to state the obvious that you're also a source of inspiration for many people, because you speak the truth and that you insist on the truth, and given your expertise, you're able to see through the absurdities and the distortions that are presented to us as reality. That's so important. Now, in terms of the questions, why is wisdom so difficult? Well, even if you look at what's going on in Palestine, Israel, strictly from the Jewish point of view, as if there was a Jewish point of view, there isn't. But even if you did, you'd have to agree from the point of view of wisdom, it's insane what they're doing. It's destructive, debilitating to their own country. It doesn't meet their security needs. It never will. And it's going to lead ultimately to their destruction. So wisdom means not cleverness, not smartness, but seeing the whole picture and seeing the future in the present. So why can't they be wise? That's the first question. And then the second question is compassion. Compassion means really, passion literally means to suffer, and com means with. So compassion means to suffer with. So compassion is the capacity to see the suffering of another person. Well, why is wisdom and compassion, why are wisdom and compassion so lacking in this present international conversation on the part of so many people? Well, what gets in the way of it? What gets in the way of it are considerations that have nothing to do with truth, considerations that exist on two levels. One is on the level of what we might call realpolitik, which is the interests of the great powers and the interests of those governments and little states like Israel that are beholden for their very justification and existence on the great powers. So the great powers, as you and I both know, have not yet finished their domination of the world. We live in a world of domination and control. And if you're interested in domination and control, it also means you have to dominate and control the conversation. And so that's why in the Western world, it's becoming increasingly difficult, at the risk of your job, reputation, and sometimes even your freedom, to speak out about Palestine. Because to do so would threaten the domination and control of the imperial system. So it's an imperial system that we're talking about here. That's on the political level. On the psychological, emotional level, grief is really interesting that you brought it up, because if you look at the history of the West in relationship to the South and the East, you might say, well, you live in Tunisia. Well, we know what the history of Tunisia has been. It's been one of colonial control by the French, and the history of North Africa has been that. The colonial power is never going to admit its own atrocities that it's committed and it's continued to commit against the South and the East. So if you go to Belgium, the average Belgian student in school never learns that the Belgians killed 12 million Congolese in the late 19th, early 20th centuries. The average Dutch student doesn't learn that the democratic Dutch killed 275,000 Indonesians after the Second World War to restore their control. The average German does not learn that the first Holocaust, the first genocide Germany committed, does not occur against Jews. It occurred against Black Africans in Namibia. The average Canadian, American, Australian doesn't learn about all the massacres of the indigenous peoples in their countries. So there's that denial of history, which then feeds into the denial of the present. I'll say one more thing and then I'll stop and ask you a question. On the psychological level, at least from the Jewish point of view, see, the history itself is not controversial. I mean, you have to be a historical illiterate not to know what happened in Palestine. And that historical illiteracy has been exposed by X number of Jewish Israeli historians that we both know and respect. The colonial takeover of Palestine by the British, the introduction of the Jewish colonials at the end of the 19th century and under the British mandate, and then the Nakba, the expulsion of the Palestinians, the continued dispossession, oppression, expulsion, and so on. I mean, you'd have to be bereft of any historical awareness not to know about those things. But why don't people? Because people's political opinions don't come from rationality. They come from what they identify with. And the identification means if I see myself in a certain way, and if I see myself as part of a certain group, that I will not allow in any information that would challenge that identity. And the Jewish identity, in tandem with Zionism, is very much defined by our victimization. And so that it doesn't matter what happens, we're always the victims. October the 7th, and neither you and I support what happened on October the 7th, but can be seen as one more terrible eruption in this century-old drama of colonization of Palestine. And it wasn't a very particularly pretty or humane, to say the least, response, but it was a response to something that's been going on for a long time and to something that the Palestinians have suffered in much greater numbers, in much greater force than the Israelis ever have, even including October the 7th. But if you identify as a perennial victim, then October the 7th was just one more anti-Semitic manifestation. The fact that if the occupiers, if the people in those settlements north of Gaza had been French or Italians or zebras or elephants, then that's who the Palestinians would have attacked. That doesn't matter. To the victim mind, they were attacked, they were Jews, because they were Jews, which is completely false. So, making a long story short, wisdom is lacking because wisdom has to see the whole picture. The colonial mindset doesn't want to see that. And compassion is lacking because identification makes me the perennial victim and the other person's reality doesn't exist. That's my answer to your question, a rather long answer, but my question to you is, so here you are traveling the world, uncovering the facts, stating the law, stating the reality. You're not actually taking sides. You're just stating this is how it is. What's it like to be telling the truth and to have it not recognized by the world, by so much of the world? And like, what keeps you going, and where do you see the hope here?
I have to say that I'm very intrigued by this identification concept that you were bringing to the fore in your answer, because there is something that has occurred to me in recent weeks, and I hope we will have the time to unpack a little bit what has happened to me in Germany, because Germany was the last place where I went. And I've been, as you say, around the world, invited by people, scholars, civil society, at times government officials or parliamentarians who want to hear my findings, my work, etc. And Germany has been particularly violent because of their self-identification with Israel, no matter what, which has nothing to do with the Jewish people or with the sense of guilt, because the sense of guilt cannot live as a cucumber out there that dries. There should be some responsibility associated to the sense of guilt that becomes awareness. And in some of us, compassion, but at least alertedness that never again has an objective dimension and cannot exhaust itself with self-identification with your past victim, whatever it was. Because again, I do think that it's a very troubled relationship, the one that is the state of Germany maintains with the state of Israel. That again has nothing to do with the Jewish people or protection of the Jewish people, etc. But there is this element that somewhat emerged that I hadn't realized before. I've often said we are part of the culture that dehumanizes the Palestinians, not seeing them as human, like it is unfortunately for many Israelis, make them easily disposable, killable, destroyable. There is something more. There is something more. It's not just that they are dehumanized and they are seen as monsters, as carriers of a threat, of a security threat. And there is something that there is a striking commonality between the language that is used against the Palestinians and especially the children, and what Nazi officials were saying of the Jewish people who were seen as a security threat, including the children, because they would grow enraged by what had happened to them, and even a bigger security threat. This is, so again, it's not just the dehumanization, it's the monstrification of the other. And I would love to hear what you think about that. But let me tell you, I think that this going around and has somewhat exposed me to something that is not often seen, is the hundreds of thousands of people globally who are tired, who are sick and tired of seeing on their screens bodies of children hanging from the wall after an explosion, or hundreds of people begging with an empty bowl to get some food. And again, the numbers are shocking. How can we not make sense of that? And the more I go around, the more, on the one hand, I discover that the hatred is very limited, and unfortunately, it's concentrated in the hands of powerful elite, in the hands of policymakers, which not coincidentally are the ones deciding of our political present and future. But because we are part of the empire, even if we are just vassals in it, but we are part of the empire. And this is probably a moment of reckoning. So on the one hand, I've realized what keeps me going is the fact that the truth is still interesting to some. And even if it was just as a matter of justice for the Palestinians, and I had to face denial of everyone, I would still do that. Because this is part of my upbringing as part in a society that absorbed the sense of guilt for what we have done to the Jewish people. But again, developing it as a way to recognize the other. Now, of course, it is. I'm also part of a fringe, I would say, in Italy right now, because my country is also becoming very racist. Yeah. But it's because of the overemphasis on the politics of identity and identification you were talking about. So what keeps me going is to see that, for example, and this is also something that I would like to ask you, in as much as it all looks very dark and very grim, it also looks very, very ultimate. It's like we were at an ultimate clash, and there is on the one side something extremely dark, extremely stinky. On the other hand, there is some light out there that, and when I keep on saying, when we see, I don't know if it was you saying that, if there are cracks on the wall, it means that there is light out there. However, it's something that I find so inspirational, and I do see the cracks. For example, never before I've heard so many people talking about settler colonialism and coming to understand the past. I don't know if historically there has been another period where there was such awareness. There was also such opening in criticizing Israel. So maybe this is the transitional moment that must happen, because unfortunately, as a humanity, we need to go through very horrible phases and transitions before becoming better. I don't know if it makes sense what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, it was another Canadian, Leonard Cohen, who said that there's a crack in everything. That's where the light gets in, and it's one of his. It's in one of his songs, and that's true. And sometimes when I get despondent, which I do in these days, I do recall that there's light out there, and the more and more people are seeing it. I think that's absolutely true, even in the Jewish community. More and more, many of the campus demonstrators in the States were actually Jewish kids who were made to suffer for their sins, but nevertheless, there they were. The Germans are an interesting case. They haven't learned one bloody thing, as far as I'm concerned. What they've done is they transferred their contempt from the Jews to the victims of the Jews, but they still retain their attitude of contempt and denial of reality. Hannah Arendt, in her great book Eichmann in Jerusalem, said something very interesting. In the 1950s, it was kind of early 60s. It was kind of a fashion in Germany for young Jewish German kids to work in kibbutzim in Israel, in kibbutzes, as a way of expiating their parents' sins. And Hannah Arendt said, if you want to expiate your parents' sins, don't go to Israel, work in a kibbutz. Stay in Germany and fight the Nazis that still are in academia and in law and in politics. Because a lot of the German leaders after the war were ex-Nazis, and that country was never denazified, and so that what's continued there is that same process, but now it's directed against the Palestinians, which means to say that the Nazi mentality is not necessarily anti-Jewish. It's just full of contempt, and it's all about control and power. And if the Jews are our allies in control and power, that's great. Then we'll work with the Jews. So Germany is the worst example where there's no liberty of speech. And the film that won the best documentary last night, No Other Land, made by an Israeli and a Palestinian, when it won a similar award in Germany, and the Jewish director pointed out that when they go back to Israel, his Palestinian co-director will face apartheid conditions, whereas he, the Israeli Jew, will have freedom of speech and movement and politics. The German Minister of Culture and the German press denounced this Israeli Jew as an anti-Semite. You couldn't get more insane than that. And, I think a lot of people, I think you're right, a lot of people are struck by the disconnect between what they're seeing in front of their eyes and what they're being told. And I don't know how it makes you feel, but sometimes I think I live in an alternate universe. A few weeks ago, maybe 2 months ago, there was an article in the New York Times on it. You know what the article was about? This is when Gazans were starving. They were being made to starve. They were being deliberately made to starve. Infants were being reduced to skeletons because of lack of food. And the New York Times had an article about a caviar farm in Israel and about how the workers at this caviar farm worked despite of the war to keep the caviar business going. And you think, what world am I living in?
Yeah. But this is the thing that I find the most striking. And in Germany is probably brought to the most extreme consequences, in the sense that when I was there, I was threatened with arrest at a certain point, because you know what I've done? You know what crime I'd committed? To
Yeah.
talk of the Holocaust in the context, as you just did, in the context of other genocides, and saying the genocide of the Jews and the Roma in Sinti and others happened because these people were the other in our own land. And what were the others? The others compared to probably the purity of Christianity. I don't know, but they were the other, while the other in the global south, I mean, what we call, for lack of a better word, global south, had experienced this as a constant for 400 years already. And dehumanization is the only common trait and common element. Seeing, I mean, even the Catholic Church had considered human beings in Latin America as valuable as things. So they could be possessed, they could be broken, they could be exploited. And until last century, they were human beings of darker complexion in zoos in Europe. So I cannot believe that there is someone, if there is something that speaks to us European, is the Holocaust. Why cannot we use it as a learning experience, both to realize that it's in fact the dehumanization of the other that lead to the commission of abominations and crimes, but also the other abhorrent thing that I realized, somewhat had happened to myself as well. Palestine has shown me and many others what genocide is in a settler colonial context. But there is, again, we have reduced the Holocaust of the Jews to the concentration camps and to the crematoria. While no, the Holocaust started with the segregation, with killing or letting Jewish people die in ghettos, sick and hungry. And the reason why, I think that it's intentional. I don't know how it's possible that it's so systemic. Maybe you have an explanation, but it cannot be coincidental that we do not own the past as we should. We do not own the genocide as we do not own the rest of our colonial past. What do you think?
Well, first of all, when people look at the Holocaust, they look at the end result, but they don't look at the process that led to it. And the process that led to it didn't begin with the Jews. It began with the political enemies of the Nazis, and who were sent to concentration camps. The first concentration camps were not for Jews; they were for the political enemies of the Nazis, whether that was socialists or communists or labor union workers, or for that matter, even Germans, Protestant or even Catholic opponents of the system. They were sent to the concentration camps. The first killings, gassings, were not of Jews. They were of German mental defectives, so-called. They were the people that were mentally ill or genetically considered inferior, or pollutants to the pure race.
Yeah.
These were the people that were the so-called mercy, and there's nothing merciful about them. But the first killings were of those people. And even when it came to the killing of Jews, Hitler didn't start off saying, "I want to kill all the Jews." He wanted to send them to Madagascar. He wanted to send them the hell out of Europe. He just wanted to get rid of them.
Yeah.
And without going into the whole history, and then the war happened, and there was kind of an internal logic that you've spoken about dehumanization. Once you start to dehumanize people, that demonization takes on a certain logic. And especially if those people, if there's a conflict, and especially if those people resist, then you just wipe them out. So when we talk about genocide in Palestine, and people, how can you compare this to the Holocaust? Well, Hitler didn't start off wanting to kill all the Jews. He would have been totally happy to send them to Madagascar or Uganda or wherever, and then, but that once the logic of dehumanization takes over, you can see what happens. So that's what happened in the Holocaust. And when you look at the Palestinians and we talk about genocide, I don't believe for a minute that Israel wants to kill all the Palestinians and eliminate and exterminate all the Palestinians. They'll just do it if they have to achieve their aims. Once they've dehumanized them, and they had to have dehumanized them in the first place, in 1948, 500 Palestinian villages were bulldozed into the ground. Their gravestones turned over. Once you start, and then, of course, the process of dispossession has been happening ever since. Every week in the West Bank right now, 2 Palestinian children get killed. 2 every week. Do you ever see that in the New York Times? Does anybody ever talk about it? You know, so once the demonization happens, once you decide that your rights are more important than somebody else's, then if the killing has to happen, then you'll do the killing. And if you have to kill tens of thousands, you'll kill tens of thousands. Even though you might not have begun with the intention of doing that, but once you've dehumanized, then, and the colonial settler project is a project of dehumanization, then you'll end up doing what you're doing. And then you'll end up being more and more vicious. And your behavior becomes more and more outrageous. And so that's the internal logic of dehumanization.
And what I find, again, probably not unique of this genocide, because the genocides that have been committed in, again, in Africa or Latin America is not, it's not that they were known to the contemporaries, they were known to the settler societies, but they were not appreciated because the people were naturally, I mean, the victims were naturally dehumanized.
Yeah.
What I find quite striking of this genocide, for example, and compared to the genocide in Rwanda or the genocide in former Yugoslavia, are 2 things. On the one hand is the fact that it's real. It's real in real time. It's on our screens, in our life. We really need to make an effort not to see that. I can't believe it's just a matter of algorithm. And again, the dehumanization of the Palestinians is so contagious that has permeated our societies. I can't recall, maybe it's really my wrong reading of history, but I can't recall of people making excuses for the Tutsis while they were genociding, for the Hutu as well, genociding the Tutsi, or same with the Serbians vis-a-vis the Bosniak. While here, there is an entire, mostly Western world, like actively enabling the genocide, politically, culturally, militarily, and others pretending not to see what's happening, because it's not just Western powers. I wouldn't say the West, because the West is also people like you, Roy, myself, and many others who are sick and tired of it, and still they feel powerless. This is why we need to talk about how to activate that magic thing that cracks the powerlessness. And I do believe that this is the time to make the change. We need to understand the moment we live in. But so one is this. The other element that is striking is that Israel is not Rwanda, the political system that Rwanda had 33 years ago. And this is not like the post former Yugoslavia collapse of national systems and then a civil war that former Yugoslavian countries ended up with. Israel still behaves like it's getting less and less democratic, less and less libertarian. It still has a pretense of rule of law system. And it's not, and now it's clearly exposed that it's everything working in the direction of the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. I agree with you that it's not the intention of the Israelis is not necessarily to kill them all, but in order to have genocide, it's not about killing them all. It's breaking, it's destroying a people, a group as a group, not seeing the individuals anymore, just seeing this sort of shapeless entity, which is a people, and wanting to push them out. So, how to reconcile the genocide that is unfolding under our eyes with the time we live in? 2025, with our human rights sensitivity, and also with Israel's development. One more thing I have to share with you and those who are listening to us. This time is reminding me of a disconnect with reality that I saw with my own eyes when I was living in Jerusalem, because I was there at the time the movie Avatar came out. And as someone coming to that land from outside, I wouldn't think of the blue beings as the Israelis necessarily. And coming out of the cinemas, most Israelis were sort of crying, were moved by the movie because they were self-identifying with the avatar. There was no much, because then I remained, I was discussing with people outside the cinema. And there is something so profoundly wrong with the way we identify with ourselves, with the rest of humanity. And for me, this is also part of a colonial legacy, which is ultimately the systematization of the pure race and the division or the hierarchy induced by the rules that we derive from the pure race theory.
Absolutely, and I think we'll probably need to go on to questions, but let me come back to what you said about children. It's so telling. Now, I don't know if people realize this, but there was this event in, was it in Brussels or was it in the Netherlands? I think it was in Brussels, where the soccer team, the Israeli soccer team came and there was a riot. Was
Amsterdam.
It was Amsterdam, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And this was presented as an anti-Jewish pogrom, you know, because there was, but what the story that press didn't tell is that the Maccabi, the Israeli soccer team, football team, its followers have been notorious racists for decades. They chant racist slogans at their games. And the night before the so-called anti-Jewish attacks, which is total nonsense, the Maccabi supporters, speaking of children, went around chanting in their hundreds, chanting, there are no schools in children, there's no schools in Gaza because we've killed the children. And they were chanting this as a victorious slogan. Do you think the bloody New York Times reported that? Or any of the Western press reported that? You could see it on YouTube. No schools in Gaza because we killed the children. And an Israeli newspaper talked about Palestinian children as future explosives. You know, now, as somebody who came very close to being thrown into an oven when I was an infant, you know, and people say there's two sides to everything. You know, this argument, there's two sides to everything. I said, okay, there's two sides to everything. There's the Nazi who wants to throw me into the oven when I'm 6 months of age. Then there's me, and I don't want to be thrown into the oven. But the Nazi's saying, but he's a Jew. He may only be 6 months of age, but when he grows up, he'll be an enemy of mankind. So I might as well throw him in the oven now before he becomes an enemy. That's the logic of the attack on children, is that they're future explosives, you know, and so that this is as far we've come. So you mentioned the children, and how is it possible to kill all these children? How is it possible for the world to watch when Palestinian kids have their limbs amputated without anesthetics because the Israelis don't let in anesthetic medications into Gaza? And how can the world watch this? then how can the newspapers ignore this? Well, all I can say is we just got to keep talking about it, Francesca. You and I are in relatively fortunate positions because we have relatively public platforms. And what I say about myself, they can't fire me because I don't have a job. So you know, and maybe you're in a somewhat fortunate situation as well. For those people who are listening, I just urge you, educate yourself, really educate yourself, and whatever platform that you have, if it's 2 people in your backyard, talk to them. But for God's sakes, don't be quiet.
Yes. Yes, yes. No, for me, it's this. And you know, as you were speaking, and I hope that the audience can hear you better now, because in the beginning, I also struggled hearing your voice. Now it's getting better, and someone was complaining about that. However, it's interesting. It's very interesting what you say, because many people ask me, as someone in the audience right now, you seem to keep cool. I cannot tell people how much these past 16 months have transformed me. Those who know me see that I'm no longer the same person. I've become much more selfless, much more centered. It's not about me. It's about what I'm doing. I'm someone who grew up in a family and in a community which really values, and we don't even need to explain. It's like that. I wouldn't say that we are selfless, but we are very compassionate people. We come from like a mountain area. So in these communities, we take care of each other. And this is something that somewhat has gone lost as growing up, and this is also part capitalism. But in somewhat, I remember I left Palestine and I went to the United States in late 2012. And this when there was the second war, Israeli war on Gaza. And then I was there holding my first child when Israel attacked Gaza for the 3rd time, and it was the 2014 war, which was the most lethal until now. 2,000 people killed, including 500 children, which was monstrous. But the feeling of defeat and despair I had, I remember I couldn't sleep. I panicked. And the only thing that gave me a sense of purpose and recovery was, I will never forget, was the first demonstration I went to in solidarity with the Palestinians in 2014. And I saw there were people from Jewish Voices for Peace who was much smaller than it is right now, and with a very different age group, older than me. But still, this fact of going there, hugging someone and crying together was what kept me going. And then going to protests, and that was it for me. Now I see that this movement is much better organized. There are students actively, this young generation, and this is why I'm so excited about the young people, and we should do a better job at protecting them. Instead of wondering, what shall I do? These young people in Canada, now at Concordia University, for example, in Canada, they are achieving amazing results by resisting, protesting, asking for accountability in their own university. How? Asking their university to cut ties with Israel, which is what member states, what Canada, Italy, the European Union should have done decades ago. We are still talking about disengaging from the settlements. Hello, this is prehistory. Now, all the more in the era of genocide, we need to take solid steps against Israel, and everyone has a power. So if you have savings in a pension fund, check that your pension funds doesn't make investments into the Israeli occupation, because chances are that your savings are going there to fund the occupation. In Canada, for example, like in other places in Europe and the United States, there are fellow citizens of ours selling Palestinian properties from our cities, like in Toronto and Montreal. I know that. I'm very prepared on Canada because I came to Canada. Or there are Canadian charities investing in the legality of the occupation. This is why it's so important what you are saying, Gabor. We need to know, we need to understand, we need to document ourselves and to act. Act, it's something that will make us feel less powerless, actually more empowered, and also reconnect to humanity. This is such a transformative moment that we have to, but again, we need to change our life if we want to change the world. This is what I'm also learning, keep on learning myself.
Airbnb, by the way, rents properties in the West Bank to tourists.
Yes,
Airbnb.
no more Airbnb for me, no more booking.com. Hello, I can still go on hotels and book directly.
Now, Francesca, last question, nothing to do with Palestine. You mentioned
Yes.
mountain people. Have you seen this Italian film, Children on the Train or Children of the Train?
Yes.
Because
Yes.
those kids are sent from Naples up into the mountains, and the people really take care of them. Well, okay. Should we open it up for questions, Roy?
Yes.
You are not ready, Roy.
What I was trying to figure out is what button do I click? I think I got it right. A bunch of questions, all very useful. One is there a parallel between the Israel war on Gaza and the one they waged in Lebanon? Similarities, differences in the way you understand it?
It's the same war. See, what you have to understand something. The ruling party of Israel, which is Likud, along with its right-wing allies, if you look at their constitution, they believe in the greater Israel. The greater Israel that extends even beyond the Jordan River. They think it extends to the Tigris, like this is an expansionist colonial state. Mm-hmm. What they do in Syria, they take over parts of Syria. Look, Syria just overthrew this dictator, and that's a very complicated question, not as simple as it's presented in the West, but nevertheless, there's a dictator overthrown in Syria. What does the first thing Israel do? It occupies Syrian territory and says, we'll stay there for a while. For a while? Ask me 10 years from now how long that while took. Lebanon, it's the same thing. Hezbollah, which is a so-called terrorist group, 45 years ago, there wasn't Hezbollah. There was an Israeli occupation of Lebanon, and Hezbollah began as a resistance movement that forced Israel out of Lebanon. Now that they've defanged Hezbollah significantly with all their bombings and they've killed all these people in Lebanon, it's part of the same colonial, domineering, expansionist war where only our own security matters. And if the people whom we dispossess fight back, then we have to kill them even more. So Lebanese villagers are not allowed to return to their villages now. And so it's not, is it a parallel? It's the same. It's identical. That's the answer.
If I can add on this, Roy, I think that the best way for people who are not familiar with colonialism to understand what colonialism is theft. Colonialism is institutionalized theft that a people commits against another people. Now, I don't even entertain the argument like Ambassador Stefanik that she believes that she argues that the Jewish people have biblical rights. I prefer talking of biblical ties with Israel. Of course they do. And so have Christians, and so have Muslims. And this gives the right to no one to steal other people's land and property. This was true 78 years ago, and it's even more true because it's protected by an international system today. So no one denies the claims. But I often say, if one day I'm agnostic about one state's states, this is something that the Palestinians first and foremost, and then the Palestinians and the Jewish Israelis will have to decide for themselves. But the state of Palestine, which is very unjust anyway, but still it's a compromise that the Palestinians at a certain point have agreed upon. If this is the minimum that should be granted to the Palestinians, which means exclusive rights to self-determination in the form of statehood, means Palestinian state without physical, material, tangible, intangible control of the state of Israel or anyone else, which doesn't mean that no Jewish people will be able to live there. Absolutely not. In fact, just for information, there are many Jewish people who live in Ramallah and other places, not like the average Israeli settlers. What does it mean? That they rent, they do not steal. And this is the thing, Jewish people can live in a Palestinian state, and not like the Palestinians inside Israel who are discriminated against. I would be really opposed to this. And so I think that it's very important to understand that there are certain dynamics that can be explained through non-legal lens, and still where the rights is helpful to re-envisage the future and a composition of the way forward.
Thank you. Another question, which maybe is our last one. How do you deal with the constant accusations of anti-Semitism?
Right. Well,
why don't you go first, Gabor?
sure.
Are you ever accused to be an anti-Semite? No, more a self-hating Jew, right?
No, I'm not an anti-Semite because I'm Jewish. So I'm a self-hating Jew. I'm a capo. I'm a Nazi collaborator. I'm a supporter of terrorism. I'm victim of the Stockholm syndrome, where I identify with my abuser. I'm a traitor. But no, I'm not an anti-Semite. So this issue of anti-Semitism. Well, look, first of all, it's a common political ploy. If anybody's old enough to remember the Vietnam War, what were the protesters against the Vietnam War called? They were called anti-American. So that as soon as you oppose the policies or the ideology of a state, you're accused of being against the people. It's total nonsense. That's the first point. And the second point is, I can name you 6 Israeli historians, 4 of them internationally known scholars of the Holocaust, some of them the most renowned, internationally revered scholars of the Holocaust, who are calling what Israel is doing genocide. These are Israeli Jews who served in the Israeli army. So if Israeli scholars, internationally renowned Holocaust authorities, are calling this genocide, then who the hell is anybody to call that anti-Semitism? That's the second point. The third point is, and the final one before Francesca gives her response, is it is Israel and the Zionist movement that identifies Israel with Judaism and Jewishness. So Netanyahu claims, and the ADL parrots, and the B'nai B'rith parrots, and all the major rabbis, with some honorable exceptions, parrot that Israel, it represents the Jews. It's the state of the Jews, acts on behalf of the Jews. Well, if that's the case, then what is the average person supposed to think of the Jews? You know, if this is happening, is this being done by the Jews for the benefit of, quote, the Jews? Maybe there's something wrong with the Jews. But of course, it's, so who's creating this? They're creating it by their rhetoric.
Mm.
Now, the reality is, if you look at Zionist history, it's a recent phenomenon in Jewish history. It's a temporary one. It was opposed by significant segments of the Jewish communities right from the beginning. And it's opposed by a small minority, but an increasingly large minority of Jews even today. So to conflate the activities of Israel with Jewishness is absolute historical garbage, number one. And number two, it's simply an attempt to intimidate you. So
Yes.
don't allow yourself to be intimidated. It's just blackmail, is all it is. So, Francesca.
Yes, I've answered this question many times, but I want to bring something new. I remember, look, first of all, I've been accused to be an anti-Semite since it was clear that I was being considered to become a special rapporteur, because this is the sort of, it is to be part of the pedigree of anyone who deals with Israel and Palestine. And it's very painful. As an Italian, it's very painful. For me, it was unconscionable that I could go ahead and with a straight face and and cope with these accusations. And then the thing is that, and this is very unfortunate, because it's a tactic it's a weaponized tool. The accusation of anti-Semitism, it's a weaponized tool to distract the attention from where it really matters, Israel's responsibilities for its continuous, relentless violations of international law at the expense of the Palestinians. It makes almost this accusation, which is very heavy, because anti-Semitism was, and will always be repugnant, especially for a European, because of our past. And still, it over and over, the weight of this evaporates, because it's so trivialized by the misuse that is constantly done by the pro-Israel groups who shout, who throw the accusations of anti-Semitism at everyone, at anyone who dares scrutinizing Israeli practices, like confetti. And I remember the first time I got complete under the barrage of attack, it was December 2022. And my dear friends, some dear friends, including some of the scholars, the genocide scholars that you referred to, Gabor, and one who unfortunately passed away, Professor Alon Confino, we became very good friends in a very short time. And he told me, don't apologize. Don't apologize. Don't let yourself defined by what other people say of you. And this is such a precious lesson. But he said, don't apologize because they will mop the floor with your face. But try to explain to people what has happened. Why, instead of saying AIPAC, you have said Jewish lobby? I say out of ignorance, because this is the way many people, including on Haaretz, Israeli politicians themselves, and in general, AIPAC is referred to, and it's wrong. So let's educate ourselves and make it better. And this is something, and since that, so this is one, don't let our others define who you are, but this is in general. And the best way to respond to the allegation of anti-Semitism is not to be afraid, because again, this is a mafia style intimidation technique, accusing you of something you have not committed so that you are scared, or inferring consequences that you might face because of an assumption, because of a dogma. And this paralyzes you. So do not engage, do not entertain, but speak out more with pride and conviction, because again, I will never forget, and I hope this inspires others. I will never forget at one of the events I had where there was a small but still very loud demonstration of pro-Israel people. I often say more flags than feet, but still they were very loud. There was a counter protest of rabbis and other people coming from various parts of New York. And one of the participants told me, I'm so grateful to what you are doing, not only because I believe that what you say is true and is right, and Israel is very wrong, but also because my grandparents died in the Holocaust. And I'm convinced that had there been more people like you around, probably you wouldn't have stopped the Holocaust, but you would have saved lives. And it's this thing we need to fight this because it's right. Doesn't matter where it's taking us. I couldn't be any different, like Gabor. Yeah, I cannot be fired. I've put aside my self-interest and anything, it's my career. It doesn't matter. Now it's about saving lives. And if we don't do that in the time of a genocide, what are we? What kind of monsters are we become? And the last point is that I do believe that this period, this transition is so powerful to reconcile a historical wound that Zionism has created. And it's the return of Judaism to the Arab region. Because this is something that being in Tunisia, I see slowly happening. There is this recognition of Jewish people fighting with the Palestinians, struggling for the Palestinian, getting fierce opposition and repression, as any Palestinians and the young people here see. They are doing more than us. They are valiant. And again, so this is, I don't know, there is something extremely cathartic in what's happening to the world. We just need, also very bad, but we need to take a step back and look at the composite nature of this present moment. I know it looks very dark, but look at the past. It's very dark as well. So we need to use what has been what is an improvement from the past, not to lose it, and actually to use it as a building block to reach even a better and more liberating state of affairs for us individually and for others.
Thank you. I wish we had more time.
Me too.
I really do. But the hour has come to a close, and it was a really tremendous conversation, and I can't thank you both enough for the opportunity to spend this time together. And I'm sure everyone not everyone, many wish you both continuing personal strength and renewed collective support to carry on your crucially important work. My thanks as well to everyone who attended today, and a special thank you to Teresa Rossella, who played a crucial role in making this event possible. Division 48, our society, hopes to host a webinar every month on topics related to resisting oppression and pursuing justice. If you're a member of our society, you'll be receiving an email announcement with further information soon. If you're not a member, we'd love to have you join us. You don't have to be a member of the American Psychological Association in order to be a member of our society, and you can join online at peacepsychology.org. Thank you again, everyone, and goodbye for now.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Roy. Thank you, Gabor. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.